Unlike Palo Alto, FortiGate High Availability PA firmware upgrade is pretty simple, but still requires several checks before starting to have everything go smoothly. Hi, I'm Alex and this is Next Gen LAN channel. Let's make it work. Just in case, if you have only one FortiGate node, the upgrade procedure has the same steps, just it will go faster as you don't have to wait for both nodes to be updated. First of all, version 7.4.5 is the last one you can install without an active support contract for a unit. Any version after it requires a support contract, and you cannot install newer firmware even locally using a downloaded firmware file. Second, carefully, carefully, check the limitations of the new version. Fortinet sometimes makes quite dramatic changes between versions. For example, as I mentioned in this video, some of the new versions do not have or will not have SSL VPN. So your attempt to remotely upgrade firmware could be a first step for a long journey. Third one. Once you're sure which firmware version you need, check the upgrade path tool. Link will be provided in the video descriptions. In many cases, hopping over some versions will not do much damage, but sometimes configuration files could have some major changes, and if adjacent versions can properly process the change, a direct upgrade to a final version needed could partially corrupt configuration. For example, upgrading Model 100F from 7.0.15 to 7.4.7 requires 7.2.10 installed before proceeding to the final one. Fourth, check that your current high availability pair has configuration status synchronized. If it's not, fix it. I will partially talk about it in the troubleshooting part, but for now let's just confirm that you should not proceed with an upgrade if units are not in sync. Last one, download all the firmware files needed from your Fortinet cabinet. In some cases, firewalls can download newer versions by themselves, but usually it only works for minor upgrades like 7.4.5 to 7.4.7. And I personally prefer a little bit more control and just upload files from my laptop using Firewalls GUI. Once everything is ready, the actual installation procedure will be: first of all, connect to HA pair management GUI. It will be the active units GUI. After it, select the firmware upgrade option. In different versions, it's under slightly different menus, but the same idea. In 7.0, it's under System Firmware and click File Upload. In 7.2, it's under System Fabric Management. After it, select a firewall pair you want to upgrade and click Upgrade. In 7.4, it's under System Firmware and Registration. Select a pair, on top click Upgrade. In 7.6, it's under System Firmware and Registration. Select a firewall pair and click the Upgrade button below the selected pair. After it, just select a new firmware, click OK to proceed. Firewall configuration has been automatically backed up to your laptop, and that's it. Now you can go and make yourself a kappa, as everything else will happen automatically, and in something about 15 minutes you'll get your pair of firewall upgraded and your network will be fully operational. Yep, that's simple. Let's try to upgrade 7.4.7 to 7.6.2. First of all, select System, Firmware and Registration. Select device you want to upgrade, click Upgrade. File upload. Select the file with the new firmware. It reminds we selected not major version for the upgrade. Configuration backup made automatically. From this moment, everything will happen automatically. New image will be uploaded to the firewall will install it, and it will reload into new firmware. Standard banner of a new firmware version. Yep, we have 7.6.2. But to understand your network's expected behavior and how to troubleshoot potential issues, we have to understand what actually happened while you were waiting. When FortiGate firewall installs a new firmware, it doesn't override the existing one, but it creates a new partition, installs new firmware on that new partition. Once all is done, just flips which partition has the active firmware. You can see both of them by issuing a command diag/sys/list. The old firmware still stays there and can be simply reactivated if you have problems with a new one. For example, using a console during firewall boot, once you have a message, press any key to display configuration menu, press any key and select option B, just push the B key. If firewall CLI is accessible, you can run the command execute set next reboot secondary to switch the old firmware as active during the next reboot. By the way, if there is already word to partitions with firmware, the old one will be deleted. Now steps of an HA pair firmware installation. First of all, the primary unit checks the new firmware image. If the image is valid, it's copied automatically to the secondary unit. Secondary unit also checks the image. If the image is valid, secondary unit installs the new firmware. Meanwhile, primary unit starts high availability reachability timeout, checking secondary unit using HA link. As I found out, it's not actually a classical timeout, when after something like 3 minutes, the primary unit upgrades no matter what. No. Instead, the primary unit just waits for the secondary to become reachable. Out of curiosity, I emulated the secondary node fail, and after something like 15 minutes, the primary unit was still waiting and didn't start its own upgrade. Next step. The secondary unit switches the active firmware to the new image and reloads. Once the primary unit sees the secondary unit as up, it starts failover timeout. During this timeout, failover happens between units, and now primary unit installs the new firmware. The primary unit switches the active firmware to the new image and also reloads. Final step, failover back to the primary unit, but only if preemption is enabled between units. As firewall nodes upgrade one by one, expected service interruption should not exceed those during a normal failover between nodes. I would say 1 to 2 seconds. Except for these two situations. First of all, if you have dynamic routing and didn't properly configure optimal failover parameters on firewalls and on your network around the firewalls, you could have about a minute of total outage. I made a special section about this in this video. Second, steps mentioned previously are correct for firmware upgrades. If you downgrade the version, firewall nodes will reload simultaneously. This means you will lose your network services for about a couple of minutes. That's one of the main reasons why downgrading is not recommended overall. Unsupported features in the new firmware. Surprisingly enough, it's one of the most damaging failures during the installation. If you miss the fact that one of the features that you use in your network is not supported in the new versions, you have to either implement a fast workaround, like switch from SSL VPN to remote access IPsec, or do a downgrade back to the previous version which has those features supported. The downgrade means both firewalls reload at the same time and a major service disruption for your network. Wrong upgrade path. Your chances of having everything working fine after going directly to the final version are quite high. But the price of having something broken is usually too damaging to save several minutes of your time skipping the recommended path. Reload a secondary unit during firmware installation. This one is a tricky one. The primary unit does not need the secondary unit to be fully up and running with the new firmware to start upgrading its own firmware. It just waits for the secondary unit to become reachable through the HA link. This means if the secondary unit reloaded during the installation, the primary unit will wait until the secondary is reachable through HA link, and once it's reachable, primary unit will still proceed with upgrading. After booting, the secondary unit will see that its firmware version is corrupted and will load the old one. So now you have two firewalls in high availability mode with different firmware versions. HA status will most probably be shown as unknown, and only the primary unit should pass the traffic, but I would not be surprised if in some cases you will have dual active here. How to fix? Just try restarting the firmware upgrade process to the same version the primary unit already has installed. It's allowed, you can do it. It should kick the secondary unit to install a new version again and have everything back to normal. If it doesn't work the hard way, reload the primary unit with the old firmware, get unit synchronized, repeat the installation. What if high availability link becomes unreachable during the secondary unit reload? It is actually the most safe hardcore fail I can think about. The primary unit will wait until the secondary is reachable through the HA link to start its own firmware upgrade. Once HA link is restored, the firmware upgrade will proceed as expected. So except for a period of dual active, you will not have major issues with nodes having different firmware versions. All other major fault scenarios are pretty much variations of these two. You can just restart the firmware upgrade, or at first downgrade a unit already upgraded, get unit synchronized and restart the upgrade. In case of high availability link issues, just fix the link and it will automatically fix both dual active and high availability status after the upgrade. After the restoration, you will most probably get into situations with configuration not synchronized between units, even when firmware versions are fixed. My recommendation is pretty simple here. Just wait. Yep, seriously. Nodes will go through a set of synchronization attempts and it could take something like 10 minutes to have everything synchronized. If it didn't happen, check which part of the config is not synchronized. Just hover mouse over non-synchronized message and you'll get a list of tables which are not synchronized, and make some minor changes in affected parts. For example, if you have user tables not synchronized, just create and delete a new user. It will force tables to sync. Pretty much the same for everything else. Talking about support contract needed for the upgrade after version 7.4.5. If you combine into HA pair units where only one has active support contract, and this unit is the primary unit, you can still upgrade the whole high availability pair to a newer version. But you absolutely should not do it, as it potentially violates terms and conditions, okay? That's it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope it was informative for you. See you next time.